Listen, I know I recently made a video which heavily involved the Ukrainian T-64, but since then, Ukraine announced another upgrade for their tank, and because of the situation in Ukraine, there were articles popping out talking about the tanks which made no sense.
They're widely regarded as better than the tanks used by the Russians.
So I just wanted to have a separate video where I talk about T-64 specifically. If you watched my previous video where I compared Ukrainian and Russian tanks, you'd know that the biggest problem is that Ukraine mainly operates a large fleet of T-64 BV tanks that are largely obsolete. Basically, the T-64 BV is a T-64B tank from 1976, with slightly improved hull armor, either with added steel plate on the hull or a different composite, and Contact 1 explosive reactive armor. Overall, as I said, it is literally a tank from 1976. Best projectile it can shoot is from mid-80s, it has no thermals, its protection is weak, and is not very mobile, having a 700 horsepower diesel engine and weighing 42.5 tons. Now, in that video I also talked about T-64BV model 2017, but we will get to it in a bit. First, I want to talk about the Bulat, or T-64BM. You have two variants, one without thermals, which is also often referred to as T-64BM1, and the one with thermals, which is referred to as T-64BM2. You can tell them apart by the fact that BM1, since it has no thermals and uses image intensifiers, has an infrared searchlight on the turret's front next to the main gun. Okay, so the first issue is, of course, that BM1 has no thermal sights and relies on the old fire control system from the 1976, even though it is supposed to be a modernization for the T-64BV tanks. T-64BM2 is in a much better state, since it is said to have second generation thermal imagers for the gunner, which is a big plus when compared to most Ukrainian tanks. Now, the production of those tanks has been completely discontinued, and T-64BV 2017 was chosen instead. Why, you may ask? Well, one of the big things about T-64BM tanks is the Noj explosive reactive armor. It was put in big containers with additional steel on top of the ERA panel for the increased effectiveness. Noj, for those who don't know, works a bit different than usual ERAs. It has small, hollow charge type explosives put together in a plate. On Bulat, those would send the steel from the flyer plate into whatever hit the tank, together with the jet stream. Now, the problem was with the fact that whoever decided to mount this on T-64s did not run proper tests, because the entire package of ERA blocks substantially increased the weight on the tank's front, creating a disbalance and heavily impacting the wear of the automotive parts like suspension. This led to a lot of parts having to be changed far more often than usual, and as such was deemed to be too much for the tanks to handle and discontinued. Now, T-64BV model 2017 has Noj panels placed in Contact 1 blocks. This substantially decreased the weight on the tank's front, but also made the ERA less effective, since it is pretty much now only the small jets coming from the ERA panel that would affect the striking projectile. On top of having balance issues, the tank did not receive any improvements to the mobility, and it had its weight increased to at least 45 tons, which made it even slower than it was. As I said in the previous video, all Ukrainian tanks are unable to fire any modern projectile, and are thus stuck with projectiles that were left over from the USSR. That is because they have not made any changes to their tanks in order to fit longer APF SDS projectiles. That includes any upgrade of T-64 tanks to date. T-64BV 2017 has been a somewhat cheap way to upgrade the old T-64BV tanks to a more modern level. Thermal for the gunner, global positioning system, and Noj ERA have made it a somewhat decent adversary to the Russian tanks. Overall, for what it is, the tank does not have that many issues. The most notable one, I would say, is the poor mobility when compared to practically any modern tank. But it is really meant to be a super cheap upgrade for the 40-year-old tanks. I can't hate on it too much. Of course, it would have been preferable to install Commander's independent panoramic sight with thermal images, but that would be too much, and would result in the fewer tanks being upgraded, and for Ukraine, the more they have, the better. And the last one is the T-64BV model 2022. Just rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? This tank resembles the 2017 model a lot, but has some notable changes. The second generation thermal imagers are replaced with the third generation ones, which is pretty neat. The tank also received cage armor for the rear portion of the tank's sides, and rubber shields on the turret's front. I don't really know what they are supposed to shield against, but okay. There are also improvements to the protection of the fuel tanks, don't ask me why, and the tank also received modern radio equipment, unlike any previous T-64 tank which still retained the old Soviet radios. In addition to the existing navigational system, this would make the tank's equipment within NATO standards. Another important change is that the NSVT heavy machine gun was replaced with the domestic Laska K2 heavy machine gun, which kinda looks like M2 Browning's ugly brother, but it is still chambered in the Soviet 12.7 by 108mm cartridge. The saddest thing is that there are no improvements to the tank's mobility. It still retains the ancient 700 horsepower engine. This engine is the same one that first appeared with the introduction of the original T-64 back in the early 60s. Yes, it is that old, and it is still being used in tanks with the 2022 label in their name. The tank is still undergoing trials and is not yet accepted into service, but if nothing happens with Ukraine, it should enter service, because it is not really much different than the 2017 model. That would be all, thanks for watching. If you like my content, you can consider supporting me on Patreon. Leaving a like and subscribing also helps a lot. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Have a nice day.